welcome to another deep dive.
Yeah.
Today we're going to try to figure out if someone is a visionary or a con artist.
Oh, interesting.
Today we're going to be looking at Elizabeth Wettlaufer.
Okay.
And she's this Canadian nurse who was convicted of murdering 8 senior citizens
Wow.
and attempting to murder 6 others.
Yeah.
And it's a case that I think will really make you think about just the dark side of human nature
Yeah.
and how vulnerable our healthcare system is.
Absolutely.
So we've got some sources.
Okay.
We've got court documents, news articles, public inquiry findings, and some academic research to help us understand how all this happened.
Well, what I think is so fascinating about this case is that it's not just about one person's horrific actions.
Right.
It also exposes some systemic issues
Yeah.
that maybe allowed those actions to go undetected for so long.
For so long.
So we're going to have to look at both sides of this
Yeah.
to try and figure out if she was truly a master manipulator
Right.
or if she was kind of enabled by a failing system.
Exactly. And to complicate things even further,
Yeah.
she confessed to these crimes,
Oh, wow.
which raises a whole other set of questions about her motives
Right.
and her mental state.
Yeah.
She described feeling a red surge before each murder and then a laughing feeling afterwards.
Oh, my goodness.
She even said that God told her to kill.
Oh, wow. That's going to be a lot to unpack.
Yeah.
But I think before we get too far ahead of ourselves, maybe we should start at the beginning.
Yeah.
What do we know about her early life
Oh, yes.
and her career?
So she was raised in a religious family in Woodstock, Ontario.
Okay.
And it seems like she had a pretty normal upbringing.
Okay.
Graduated from Conestoga College as a registered nurse
Mm-hmm.
and started her career at Geraldton District Hospital.
All right. So before you go on,
Yeah.
you mentioned she had a religious upbringing.
Mhm.
I'm really curious about the role that religion played in her life,
Yeah.
especially considering that later on she claimed that God told her to kill.
Right.
Do the sources shed any light on, like, how devout she was or how her religious beliefs may have evolved over time?
That's a great question. And unfortunately, the sources don't go into a lot of detail about her religious beliefs
Okay.
during her childhood or early adulthood.
Yeah, okay.
It seems like her faith became more of a focal point later on,
Okay.
kind of intertwined with her mental health struggles and her substance abuse.
Got it.
So it's something we should definitely keep in mind as we learn more about the case.
Okay.
But for now, let's go back to that first job at Geraldton.
All right.
It wasn't very long before she was fired for stealing benzodiazepines
Oh, wow.
and working under the influence.
Oh, that's a major red flag.
Talk about a red flag. You would think that that would have been a career ender,
Absolutely.
but somehow she was able to bounce back and get jobs at other healthcare facilities.
Wow. So that's where I think this question of grifter versus gifted gets really interesting.
Yeah.
Was she cunning enough to hide her issues and kind
Right.
of manipulate her way into these positions? Or did the system really fail to properly vet her
Yeah.
and protect those patients?
That's a big question.
Okay.
And so after Geraldton, she worked at a bunch of different long-term care facilities in southwestern Ontario.
Okay.
And her crimes actually spanned to 9 years.
9 years.
Yeah, it's a long and disturbing list of victims.
Yeah.
We have James Silcox, who was 84, Maurice Granat, also 84, Gladys Millard, she was 87, Helen Matheson, 95, Mary Zerowinski, 96, Helen Young, 90, Maureen Pickering, 79, and Arpad Horvath, 75.
Wow.
And it's heartbreaking to think that these people, in their final years, were entrusted to her care
Right.
and ended up being her victims.
Yeah, and we can't forget about Clotilde Adriano and Albina de Medeiros, who were sisters that she murdered at Coruscant Care.
Yes.
Their deaths were originally attributed to natural causes.
Wow.
And I think that really highlights how difficult it can be to detect and stop these healthcare serial killers. They often operate within these systems that are designed to promote care and compassion.
Yeah.
So it makes their actions that much more insidious.
It's terrifying to think how many more victims there might have been if she hadn't confessed.
Absolutely.
And she reportedly confided in a lot of different people before going to the authorities, like a former boyfriend, a student nurse,
Yeah.
a pastor, and his wife.
Oh, my goodness.
It makes you wonder why none of these people came forward sooner.
Yeah. I mean, that's a question that haunted a lot of people following this case.
Yeah.
There were a lot of discussions about the ethical and legal obligations of people in positions of trust who received these kinds of disturbing confessions.
It wasn't until she confessed to the staff at a rehab facility
Okay.
that the authorities were finally alerted.
Wow.
And apparently she told them that she was terrified of hurting these diabetic children that she was working with.
Oh, my goodness.
So she formally confessed to police on October 24th, 2016,
Okay.
at 49 years old. And she ultimately pleaded guilty to all 14 charges against her.
Wow.
8 counts of first-degree murder, 4 counts of attempted murder,
Yeah.
and 2 counts of aggravated assault.
That guilty plea is really significant, though, because it suggests that on some level she had an awareness.
Yeah.
And she accepted responsibility for her actions.
Right.
Even though she was attributing her urges to this red surge.
Right.
And she claimed that God told her to kill.
Right. But even with a confession, understanding her motive remains a challenge.
Yeah.
When she was interviewed by police, there were inconsistencies in how she described the laughing feeling that she claimed to experience after these murders.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Sometimes it was a feeling in her chest, other times it was in her stomach.
Huh. It's almost like she was trying to craft this narrative that fit a certain image or expectation. Makes you wonder if there was an element of manipulation there, a desire to control how she was perceived, even as she was admitting to these really horrific crimes.
It's a chilling thought.
Yeah.
And it makes you wonder, how much did her mental health play into all of this? I mean, she was diagnosed with major depressive disorder, borderline personality disorder, antisocial personality disorder.
Yeah.
And she also had a long history of battling alcohol and opioid addiction.
Wow. So how do we untangle all of those threads and figure out what really drove her to commit these acts?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
A really complex puzzle, and it's tempting to look for just this single clear-cut answer.
Right.
But the reality is that human behavior, especially in cases like this, it's rarely that simple.
Absolutely.
So I think we need to consider all these factors. Her mental health struggles, her substance abuse, her religious beliefs, and even the possibility that she was on some level a master manipulator who knew how to exploit the vulnerabilities within the system.
That's a lot to unpack.
It is a lot to unpack.
And we're just getting started.
Stay with us as we continue to delve into the depths of this case.
It's crazy to think that she was able to maintain this seemingly normal life outside of her crimes.
Yeah.
She had relationships, she went to church, she even sought help for her addictions. So it's like this red surge she described was just compartmentalized.
Right.
This dark secret hidden beneath a veneer of normalcy.
It's almost like a psychological thriller.
Right.
Like the church-going nurse next door, secretly harboring these murderous urges. What do experts say about this kind of psychological phenomenon in cases like this?
So there's been a lot of research on healthcare serial killers, and one of the things that they found is that a lot of them exhibit this disconnect between their outward persona and their inner world.
Yeah.
They can be very charming and compassionate
to
their colleagues and their patients, while secretly engaging in these horrific acts.
So it's not really a case of multiple personalities or anything like that?
Not exactly. It's more about like a distorted sense of reality.
Okay.
Where they believe they're somehow above the rules or that their actions are justified, even when they clearly violate societal norms.
That's unsettling, to think that someone can be so good at hiding their true nature. It makes you wonder how many other cases like this are out there.
Yeah, it's a scary thought.
Lurking beneath the surface of these seemingly ordinary lives.
Yeah, and it really highlights the need for more awareness.
Right.
Especially in professions where people have positions of trust.
Yeah.
And they have access to vulnerable individuals.
Absolutely. And speaking of vulnerabilities, we can't ignore the role that systemic failures played in this whole thing.
Right.
Carissa and Care in particular seem to have multiple opportunities to intervene.
Yeah.
But they chose to prioritize cost savings over patient safety.
Yeah, it's really a classic example of what can happen when profit is put over people.
Yeah.
And in this case, that decision to cut corners and avoid those potential financial repercussions.
Yeah.
It really had devastating consequences.
That's heartbreaking.
Imagine how those families feel knowing that their loved ones might still be alive if the system had just worked properly.
One family member described it as a nightmare I can't wake up from. To know that your loved one's final days were full of fear and suffering inflicted by someone that they should have been able to trust.
Right.
It's unimaginable.
And that's where the grifter aspect really comes into play.
Right.
She was able to exploit the weaknesses of the system to gain access to these vulnerable individuals and commit these heinous acts.
What about the gifted side of things?
Right.
Is there anything that points to a genuine desire to help people? Like a spark of compassion that got twisted along the way?
Yeah.
Or was it all just a facade?
That's a really difficult question to answer definitively.
Right.
There's some evidence that she struggled with her own demons, with mental illness and addiction, and that she may have even sought help at times. But whether those efforts were genuine or just a way to maintain appearances is really hard to say.
It's a puzzle with a lot of missing pieces.
Absolutely.
But one thing is for sure. This case was a huge wake-up call for Canada. It forced this national conversation about the state of long-term care and the systemic vulnerabilities that allowed this to happen.
Right. The public inquiry that followed her conviction actually made 91 recommendations.
Wow.
Calling for these sweeping changes to improve safety and oversight within the long-term care sector.
That's a lot.
Yeah, it really is. These recommendations address a wide range of issues, from increasing staffing levels to improving training to enhancing background checks and encouraging better communication between regulatory bodies.
One of the recommendations that really stuck out to me was the call for a cultural shift within long-term care.
Yeah.
Moving away from a culture of silence to one that really emphasizes transparency and accountability.
It's about giving the staff the power to speak up when they see something wrong without being afraid of retribution.
Yeah.
It's about creating a system where patient safety is the #1 priority.
Absolutely. Not just something they say, but something they actually do. There was also a really strong emphasis on the need for better mental health support for healthcare professionals.
Absolutely.
I mean, her struggles with mental health and addiction were well documented, but the system failed to provide her with the support that she needed.
And that's such a critical point.
Yeah.
I mean, these healthcare professionals, they work in these high-stress environments.
Yeah.
They're exposed to trauma and suffering on a daily basis.
Constantly.
We need to make sure that they have the resources and the support that they need
Absolutely.
to cope with these challenges.
What about the role of technology?
Oh, that's an interesting question.
Could advancements in technology help prevent tragedies like this from happening in the future?
There's definitely potential there. Things like electronic medication administration records, those can help track medication usage and flag any irregularities.
Right.
And then there are also systems that use artificial intelligence to analyze patient data and identify potential cases of abuse or neglect.
So it sounds like a multi-pronged approach is needed.
Absolutely.
We need to address those systemic issues, improve support for healthcare workers, and explore these technological solutions that can enhance patient safety.
It's not about placing blame.
Right.
It's about taking concrete steps to prevent these tragedies from happening again.
Absolutely. We owe it to the victims and their families to create a system that is truly safe, compassionate, and accountable.
100%.
This case is a reminder that evil can really lurk in unexpected places.
Yeah.
And that those who commit horrific acts can be masters of deception.
It's true.
It challenges everything we think we know about trust and vulnerability.
It does.
And it forces us to confront some really uncomfortable truths about human nature.
Yeah, and it emphasizes how important it is that we're vigilant, that we ask questions, and that we advocate for change.
Right.
When we see systems failing to protect the people who depend on them.
So we've talked a lot about the systemic failures that contributed to this whole thing.
Yeah.
But what can we actually do to prevent something like this from happening again?
That's a question, isn't it?
Yeah, it feels almost overwhelming, like trying to catch a ghost.
It can feel that way, but I think going back to those 91 recommendations from the inquiry, that's a good starting point.
Okay.
There's no quick fix, obviously.
Right.
It's going to require a multi-pronged approach. But I think if we break it down into smaller pieces, it becomes a little bit more manageable.
Okay.
One of the most glaring issues was the understaffing in long-term care facilities.
Right.
Nurses were just completely overworked and stretched too thin, often having to juggle multiple patients, all with very complex needs.
And it's easy to see how in that kind of environment, mistakes are going to be made.
Exactly.
People are going to burn out.
Yeah.
And patient care is going to be compromised.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it creates the perfect environment for someone like Wettlaufer to slip through the cracks.
Exactly. And those errors, especially when you're talking about medications like insulin, they can be fatal.
100%.
So the inquiry recommended increasing staffing levels, providing more training,
For sure.
and creating an environment where staff feel safe speaking up if they have concerns about patient safety.
Speaking of training, they also recommended that there should be a standardized approach
Okay.
to training for people who work with these vulnerable seniors.
Okay.
And specifically, they highlighted the need for more education on how to recognize and respond to potential signs of abuse.
That makes a lot of sense.
Right. It's not just about having enough staff.
Right.
It's about making sure those staff members know what to look for.
Mhm.
They need to be able to spot those red flags.
Like what kinds of red flags?
Things like unexplained injuries,
Okay.
sudden changes in someone's behavior,
Mhm.
or inconsistencies in medication records.
Okay.
And then, just as importantly, they
Yeah.
need to feel safe reporting their concerns
Right.
without being afraid of losing their jobs or being dismissed.
We saw that in the Wettlaufer case.
Exactly.
There was that culture of silence at some facilities.
Yeah,
Where people were hesitant to report their concerns about her,
right.
whether it was out of fear or misplaced loyalty.
Yeah.
So how do we change that?
That's a great question, and that's where strong leadership comes in.
Okay.
And a real commitment to transparency.
Okay.
Facilities need to create this environment
Yeah.
where reporting problems is encouraged and rewarded,
Okay.
not punished.
Yeah.
It's about fostering open communication and collaboration
Okay.
so that staff members feel comfortable sharing information and
Yeah.
supporting each other.
The inquiry also highlighted the importance of communication between those regulatory bodies,
Yes.
like the College of Nurses and the Ministry of Health.
Right.
It seems like there were several missed opportunities to intervene in her case.
Right.
Because information wasn't being shared effectively.
Yeah, they are operating in silos
Yeah.
with each agency kind of doing its own thing.
Exactly. So we need a more streamlined and transparent system
We do.
for sharing information about these potential risks
Exact.
to patient safety.
And that includes things like disciplinary actions, criminal charges, any red flags that could point to a risk for these vulnerable individuals.
And they also made recommendations about improving background checks for healthcare workers.
For sure.
Because in her case, her history wasn't adequately disclosed.
Yeah, she was able to reinvent herself every time she moved to a new facility.
Right.
So employers need to know about a potential employee's past conduct.
Right.
And that includes disciplinary findings, criminal convictions, anything that could be relevant.
Okay. So we've talked about staffing, training, communication.
Yeah.
What about technology? Could that help prevent future tragedies?
I think it definitely has a role to play.
Yeah.
Things like electronic medication administration records,
Right.
or EMARs for short.
Right.
Those can help track medication usage
Okay.
and really quickly identify any irregularities or discrepancies.
Right.
And then there are systems that use artificial intelligence to analyze patient data
Right.
and flag potential cases of abuse or neglect.
It's almost like having an extra set of eyes watching over the patients.
Right. Those technologies are still evolving,
Right.
but they have huge potential
Yeah.
for enhancing patient safety.
It sounds like we need to be doing a lot of things.
Yeah,
Addressing those systemic issues,
for sure.
improving support for healthcare workers,
Absolutely.
exploring these technological solutions, and fostering a culture of transparency and accountability.
It's a multi-pronged approach for sure.
The Wettlaufer case was a tragedy,
It was.
and we have to learn from it
We do.
to do everything we can
Absolutely.
to prevent these things from happening again.
100%.
We owe it to the victims,
Yeah.
their families,
Mhm.
and everyone who depends on our care
Right.
to create a system that is truly safe, compassionate, and accountable.
It's a reminder that evil can sometimes wear a very friendly face.
Yeah.
And that people who are entrusted with our care
Right.
don't always live up to that trust.
This case forces us to think about human nature
It does.
and the systems that we rely on.
Yeah, and it gives us this opportunity to really reflect on our own roles
Right.
in demanding better
Yeah.
for those who are the most vulnerable.
Well, thank you for joining us for this deep dive
Of course.
into the Elizabeth Wettlaufer case.
Absolutely.
We hope this conversation has given you a deeper understanding
Yeah.
of the complexities of this case
Mm-hmm.
and a renewed sense of commitment
Hmm.
to advocating for the safety and well-being of everyone in our care.